In this video, we're going to learn how to use the calculator to evaluate some of the expressions that we found when we were solving equations. So, this was when we did the deconstruction process in solving equations. We're going to see how we can evaluate these expressions in the solve section, and then we're going to see how we can use the calculator to check our results. So first, our first answer was 5 minus 1 divided by 3, or the quotient of the difference of 5 minus 1 with 3. That was our solution for x. And again, this one isn't too hard to find on your own, but let's just see how we do this. So first I need a fraction, so I'm going to press this button. It says n over d, and that stands for numerator over denominator. And notice when I press a button it turns red, and the key history, all the keys I'm going to press are going to be here. Okay, so if you ever miss anything, just pause it, or if you want to go back and look at this, you can pause the video. So in the numerator we have 5 minus 1. Now I want to move down to the denominator, so I'm going to use the down button. Notice the cursor is now blinking in the denominator. I'll put our 3. I'm going to use the right arrow to get out of the fraction, and this is exactly what I need, so I'm going to hit enter. Notice it gives us a result as a fraction. That's what we want in this case, 4/3, and it corresponds to our answer that we did by hand. If you ever need a decimal and you're given a fraction, you can click this button, and it will take your previous answer and change it to a decimal. Or if you're given a decimal and you want it as a fraction, you can do the same thing. Just hit this button, and it took your previous answer, changes it to a fraction. Okay. Now let's use the calculator to check our work. So now I'm going to clear the calculator, and I'm going to clear this press history so we can start fresh. And again, you can always go back and pause the video to look at the previous one. So here we have 3x plus 1, and we want to check that when x is 4/3, that result will be 5. So I'm going to type in 3, and now when I replace x, I'm going to put it in parentheses. I want to replace x with 4/3. Okay. It's good practice to put it in parentheses in general, especially when it's multiplied or divided, okay, because the juxtaposition, remember, being next to implies multiplication. We don't need to hit the multiplication symbol. We want to add 1, and the result should be 5. Since it is, it checks just like our work by hand showed. Let's look at the next one. Okay. Here our result was 8 minus 12 divided by 4 plus 2. Okay, so I'm going to hit the fraction button. In the numerator we put 8 minus 12. In the denominator we put 4. Okay. And now notice I need a plus 2. If I hit plus 2 now, it would be in the denominator, and that's not where we want it. Notice the plus 2 is we added 2 to this quotient. It's not part of the quotient. So rather than redo the whole thing, there is a way to delete. So I'm going to use the arrow till it goes over the 2, and this button says delete. And I'm also going to delete this addition symbol. Okay. Now I hit the right arrow, and now notice we're out of the fraction. And I'm going to now do plus 2, and our result is 1. Okay. So now let's check our result here. Okay. I'm going to clear these. This is a little hard to see, but the calculator ends up overriding it. Let's look at it for a second. So we have 4 parentheses x minus 2 plus 12, and we want to see if that equals 8 to check it. So we have 4 parentheses. Instead of x, I'm going to enter 1, and then I am subtracting 2. Okay. And notice I didn't put the 1 itself in parentheses. I could have. The reason I didn't is that we're subtracting 2 from 1. It's not a multiplication or division part. You could put the 1 in parentheses and you get the same result. Okay. 4 times 1 minus 2, I believe that says plus 12 outside the parentheses. And the result is 8, and it checks. Let's look at the next one. Now here in parentheses we have a quotient, so I'm going to start with parentheses, then I'm going to make my fraction. In the numerator we have 18 minus 6. And in the denominator I have a 4, so I'm going to use the down button, 4. I'm going to use the right button and close the parentheses. Then we have times 2. So times 2, notice it uses an asterisk for multiplication, and plus 5. And our result is 11. Now let's check it. Clear this history. So we have 4 parentheses. Now I have a fraction in the parentheses, and we're replacing x with 11 to check it. So the numerator is 11 minus 5. The denominator is 2. Now I need to close the parentheses, so I'm going to move outside the fraction, close parentheses, and add 6. Our result is 18, and that checks with the right-hand side of the equation. And it checks with our written work. Okay. Here's our next one. They're going to get a little trickier, where you'll be really thankful to use the calculator. So let's look at this expression. We're going to start with parentheses, and now we have a fraction 7 over negative 3. So I hit the fraction button, go to the denominator. Now notice this is the subtraction button. Okay, this is the negative button. Okay, so notice this is negative 3 in the denominator. It's not subtract 3. So you need to use this button. Okay, so negative 3. Notice that the negative button, it's a little bit higher, it's a little bit smaller than a subtraction button, but if you get a syntax error, this is something you might want to check. If I had hit this button there, at the end it would say syntax error, that I made a mistake, and I'd need to fix that. Okay, so now out of the fraction, we want to add 5, close the parentheses, and then multiply by 2. Our result is 16 thirds. Okay, and that's what we got here. So now let's check this. This is going to be handy for checking this. It's going to be a little bit messy, but we can put fractions in fractions. So first we're going to start with negative 3, parentheses. Now we need a over 2, which is a fraction, so I'm going to hit the fraction button. Now I want to replace a with 16 thirds. So I'm going to hit the fraction button again, and put 16 thirds. Now notice I've moved down to the denominator of the big fraction. I'm calling it the big fraction because notice how this bar is longer. So that's saying this is our numerator and this is our denominator. Our numerator just happens to be a fraction, okay, and the bar is a little bit shorter to indicate that. So that will help you see if you have everything in the right place. The denominator here was 2. Move outside this fraction within a fraction. I believe that says minus 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 and close the parentheses. Okay. I hit enter. The result is 7, and that's the right-hand side of this equation, so our solution checks. Let's look at the next one. So here's the expression we need to calculate to find the solution for a. Okay. So notice we have a big fraction. This is our numerator. This is our denominator. So I'm going to start by hitting the fraction button. The numerator is 2. Then we have parentheses. We have a fraction minus a fraction. So our first fraction is 2/5. Move outside of the fraction, and I want to subtract 7 thirds. Make a new fraction. Move out of the fraction, close the parentheses, and the denominator was 3. Now I'm going to hit enter, and our result is negative 58 over 45, or negative 58 45ths, which corresponds to what we got when we did this by hand. Okay, now let's check this. Okay, this will be a lot less computations than when we did this by hand, and it's fine to do these by hand, okay, and it's fine to do them on the calculator. I'd prefer you do both, but sometimes when they're messy like this, I really want to make sure you're getting the algebra and checking your solutions, and some of these computations can be tedious. So make sure you do them by hand, make sure you also check them. So first, we have a fraction. In the numerator is 3a, so we have 3. Since I'm multiplying by a, I'm going to use parentheses, and this is my a. So parentheses, negative, and we have 58 over 45. Now I want to close those parentheses, and our denominator here is 2. So that's our first fraction. Now we want to add 7/3, so plus fraction 7 over 3. Move out of the fraction. I'm going to hit enter. If our result is correct, if our solution is correct, we should get 2/5, and we do. So now let's look at the last one. Now here you may recall, let's look at this a little bit bigger, okay, that we had an operation where we needed to reciprocate. Okay, and we can write this algebraically, but we decided to perform each computation by hand. So we start with negative 2/3, we divide it by 7. We take that result and we reciprocated it. We took that result, we decreased by 1, and we did all of these by hand. And you can absolutely do this on the calculator as well. So let's do this step by step, and I'll show you how you can use, we call this a recursive process, meaning we're using our previous result to find our next result. Okay, so let's start with negative 2/3 is divided by 7. So I'm going to hit the negative button, the fraction button, 2/3. And since the calculator is doing it, we had rewritten it as multiplying by 1/7, but we could just do divided by 7. That's our first step. Okay, and we have negative 2/21, or negative 2 over 21. Now our next step is to take this quotient and reciprocate it. Now you can do this by hand, but there's actually a button that does this on the calculator. This little x with a -1 raised up high. Okay, you'll learn more in another class what a -1 exponent means, but it basically means reciprocate. So I'm going to hit this button, and notice it says answer and then this -1 raised up high. So once you hit enter, you can perform your next operation by just hitting the button. It takes your previous answer and performs the operation. So I'll hit enter, and notice it just interchanged the numerator and denominator. Now the next thing we wanted to do is the reciprocal, which we just found, is decreased by 1. So I'm not going to re-enter this. I want to decrease by 1, that's subtraction. And notice it says answer, so it always takes your previous answer, subtract 1, and I'll hit enter. So now we have -23 over 2. Then it says the difference is divided by, does that say 3 or 5? The difference is divided by 3. Okay, so this is my difference, and I'm just going to hit divide 3, enter. And we have -23 over 6. And notice this corresponds to our result when we did this by hand. Okay, so now let's check this. We're going to look at the left-hand side of the equation, evaluate it. Our result should equal -2/3 if this is correct. So I start with a fraction. We have 7 in the numerator. The denominator is 3 times x, and x in this case, I put parentheses, and my fraction is -23 over 6. Move outside the fraction, close the parentheses, and we need to add 1. Move outside the big fraction, and our result is -2/3, and it checks. Okay, so I hope these calculator videos were helpful. You can pretty much do anything you need to do on this calculator and rewrite them with fractions. So I hope you watch through this. Sometimes you need practice, okay, so you can always refer to them later as well.